The word epiphany, the season that we are in, the word means illumination, a revealing, an aha, that changes your perspective, changes your consciousness, shifts your reality. The Magi from the privileged class followed a star, and they initially assumed that it would naturally lead them towards King Herod, a classmate of privilege. But they quickly realized the star hovered instead over this humble abode with a baby in a barn, a baby who had no status. And yet that baby was the hope of the world. The privileged Magi had an epiphany in the presence of that peasant baby. To help bring that story into our context, it might be similar if one night a woman in safe parking delivered a newborn in her car. And we came to believe, to seriously believe, that that baby would someday become the president or the key to world peace. Such an insight, such an aha, such a conviction would shift our own reality and our own worldview and priorities and actions. If we really thought such a thought, my bet is that we would do all that we could to make sure that baby was sheltered in a home, that the mom had excellent health care and a job, enough to survive and to thrive. And we'd probably establish an education fund for the baby's growth and development. We'd grease as many wheels as possible to help make a way when in the normal world there really was no way. That's what an epiphany is. Shock and awe to your belief system, to how you see the world, to your priorities, your way of life. It changes you. In the gospel text, Jesus is giving his disciples the equivalent of his own last will and testament. He has just finished washing their feet at their Last Supper. Right after his teaching, he will lead them into the garden from whence he will be arrested and tortured and the next day crucified for treason. He took this time to teach them about the Holy Spirit, the advocate, who would guide them into truth once he was gone. The truth that they would be given an advocate, that we would receive, we would experience the presence of God within us. This advocate would seal us through the Spirit into Christ. Essentially, this text is getting all mystic on us. Jesus is teaching that God, the Creator, and Jesus himself as God's Christ are one. To know one of them is to know the other. Two sides of the same coin. And the advocate, the Holy Spirit, is also part of that coin. To know Jesus is to know God. To know the Spirit is to know God. One God, three faces. Father, Son, Spirit, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, God beyond us, God with us, God within us. The text is a description of the triune mystery of God, the strange, uniquely peculiar doctrine of Christian faith. Not three gods, but three distinctions, unified in one God, a unified diversity. A God who is community, a dynamic, ongoing pouring forth of love, lover, beloved, and loving, more of a verb than a noun, a God who cannot be fully known, yet is experienced in every moment and can be communicated with. It's a weird doctrine. It's a weird belief. But don't tune out just yet. Here's my punchline. This is why it's important to wrestle with this weirdness. The point of all these words is this. Did you know that just last year, us, sheltered 29 kids from 14 families in our safe parking program? Christ kept coming to us, vulnerable and homeless and without status. But it takes an epiphany to see this as truth. And if we see this as truth, it's going to change our lives and our priorities and our attitudes and our actions. It's going to make us as weird as the triune God itself. I hope you've tuned back in. In Jesus' teaching, he makes it clear that the advocate, the Holy Spirit that is given to us, will guide us into truth. The advocate will teach us how to follow Jesus' commandment to love one another. The advocate is our connector, the glue that attaches us to Christ, who is attached to God. To use the coin analogy again, it's like heads is God, and tails is God, and the coin is God, and around the edges of the coin, we're attached. Almost like a 4-in-1. In other words, every one of us is more than what we seem. Every one of us has the potential and capacity to be the love of God flowing in life. That is, to compassionately offer ourselves as midwives for the birthing of others into a life of love. Each of us a replica of Christ, a repetition of Christ on earth as in heaven. And that just sounds incredulous to us. That sounds like weirdness to us, like beyond belief. It certainly does to me. I think most of us love to love. And when we love, we feel most ourselves. And at the same time, I think that most of our lives revolve around pettiness, the judgment of others, of being afraid of what others think, resentment that we never became what we wanted to become, sadness about that which we could have done, but never did, and on and on. Most of our lives, when we actually review our life, which is a great reason to pray, when we actually review our life, we find that we hide our love. We try to secure it. We try to protect it. We try to make others earn it before we give it. Most of our love has never been given. There's so much of ourselves that never shows up in life. And so when the preacher says stuff like, every one of us has the potential to be the love of God, or to be a replica of Christ on earth, or to actually come to the truth, seeing Safe Parkers as representations of Christ with us. Most of us hear those words like a judgment rather than an invitation to explore. And so we just shut down and we move on and we wonder what's for lunch. Without the advocate's presence, it's hard to love those that are not immediately in our family circle, not immediately part of our responsibility. It's hard and it's aggravating to enlarge the circle to just anybody. And so we mute the Spirit or delete the Spirit. We distract ourselves. We make excuses. We avoid the problem. It's hard to think of oneself as a little Christ, as a replica of Christ, because everything, every person, every moment then becomes an occasion for responsibility. And if you try to live like that, that overwhelms us. We ask, what will become of me if I don't protect myself? Martin Luther King wrestled with these same questions. You know, King himself grew up in privilege. As the son of Daddy King in a prestigious pulpit, King had advantages that others didn't. Doors that were closed to others opened for him within the African American community. But with advantages came expectations. I mean, he still had to work hard. He had to pour his entire self into his studies at school and into his vocation when he hired into his first pulpit. And from there, events out of his control took over. I mean, he didn't start off as a legend. He started off as a well-educated, middle-class graduate, but his fame came through courageous leadership during what became known as the Montgomery bus boycott. And I want to focus on the word courage. Where did that courage come from? I mean, he could have made other choices. He could have postured. He could have talked big but let others do the hard work. And none of that was his way. He said, courage is an inner resolution to go forward despite obstacles. Cowardice is submissive surrender to circumstances. Courage breeds creativity. Cowardice represses fear and is mastered by it. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expedience asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells one that it's right. For Christians, the courage of conscience emerges I think, out of our spiritual practices of worship, of biblical reflection, of prayer, of doing acts of justice and mercy. The courage of conscience emerges from our being formed as a community, united in our diversity, as we dare to edge out of our cocoons into the lives of those who are different than ourselves. The courage of conscience is not something we can fake through words and posturing. Rather, it requires movement and action, putting our own body on the line, our own money in the game, and quite often causing our own families discomfort and sacrifice because of our conscience. The courage of conscience is formed from a heart that is inspired and goaled towards love, more love, more love, more love, towards this ever expansive loving that keeps including the one who is not like me. In King's context, it was very much a movement to bring together segregated black and white folk, not only on a personal level, but systemically. But it grew in his short lifetime to include our relationship with the people in Vietnam and the systemic violence and militarism of our society. King was on a spiritual journey to fulfill the advocate-led Christ teaching of love thy neighbor. His neighborhood kept expanding. In our context, bringing it home, our immediate neighborhood includes Safe Parkers, whom we do desire to see housed and healed, employed and equipped with all that makes for a life of thriving rather than just the mere maintenance of survival. In our context, it is to keep going deeper, to see the Safe Parkers as friends whose names we know, whose stories we listen to. Not as strangers that we help now and then, not as charity. We desire to relate as siblings in a common family, not always keeping the other dependent upon our good graces. We desire to have as our first thought how valuable and wonderful each of our guests are. The ongoing epiphany that we need is to continually see the person, the Christ, and not the situation. And that's what the Holy Spirit is. It's an epiphany maker. It hovers over our heart and mind, continually calling us and guiding us and inspiring us with courageous visions of the way the world ought to be. And when we act on those visions, God is with us, truly and practically with us. We're never alone. We become capable of miraculous outcomes. We change the world, both for the other and our own self, and for those too afraid to act, but are always watching, hoping. We can change the world. We have. For some of those 29 kids and 14 families. We can change the world for each woman who enters our spiritual household. We can find our own world changing. But it won't be easy. Spirit work is never easy. It's almost always a heavy lift. It requires sacrifice. It takes on suffering, as the crucified Christ makes clear, as King's life made clear. King said this: "The first question which the priest and the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man in the ditch, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan reversed the question. If I don't stop to help this man, what will happen to him?" The Trinity is a strange doctrine, but it does point to a very practical truth that when God is a community, a unified diversity, an interrelational, interdependent movement in history, then we ourselves, individually and collectively, have capacity, have response, ability, have possibility and potential to co-create the world into the world that we desire. And that's a heavy lift. But just to give you a very practical, personal example, it's no heavier than the lift Kathy and I made when we married. It's no heavier than the lift that we made twice more when we brought two beautiful boys into this world. We did not then, nor do we today, know if that would bring greater suffering or greater joy. But given all these years, I can say at least this: it is the love that we poured out that has made our life so full of gratitude. It's the love given and received that has made life good. Love, in other words, that's the truth of this text. Everything else is a much lesser good. And how much more wonderful to keep expanding that love, to keep proving by example the presence of God on earth as in heaven. In the words of the hymn, Spirit of God in all, born of grace we rise, love shining in our eyes. Come, Spirit, come.